Hello, everyone. I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. My body is a cavern filled to the brim with writhing parasites. One little step, that's all it took when I think about it. Despite wearing heavy boots, a sharp pain shot up my leg from the bottom of my foot. It was quick, like getting jabbed by a needle. I winced, looking at where I had stepped along the riverbank with confusion, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I must have misjudged my next step due to the pain, because I ended up on my face less than a second later. "Miss?" I heard, filled with concern. A few dozen feet in front of me was Marcus, our hiking guide, an older gentleman with silver hair and your typical adventurer's starter kit. Greasy skin, khakis, a safari-style button-up, and an absolutely unbearable can-do attitude that was hard to keep up with. "I'm all right," I shouted back, but he was already moving through the rest of the group toward me. I managed to get up and take another step, only for a similar pain to shoot back up through my foot. "Short break. Don't wander off too far," he shouted to the rest of the group, which promptly scattered, exploring the surrounding wilderness. The guide approached me and signaled for me to sit down on a nearby rock. "I'm okay, just lost my balance," I said as he knelt next to me and took out a small med kit from his hiking bag. "I believe you, miss." He took a second to look at my name tag, which every participant had created before the hike. "Tara, that was still quite a fall. It's dangerous to continue without treating a wound like that." He took out a small alcohol wipe from the med kit and motioned for me to show him my arm. A sizable gash greeted the both of us. I hadn't even noticed. "Oh, thanks. I guess it was." I watched as he patted the wound with the alcohol wipe, making sure to sufficiently clean the area of dirt and debris. He must have noticed how tense I was, as a look of concern never left his eyes. "You know, we get a lot of different types of people out here who come for a lot of different reasons." Marcus began to comfortably wrap my arm in gauze. He had clearly done this many times. "Nature enthusiasts, trail buffs, spiritual types, the occasional lost soul looking to find themselves and whatnot." Grabbing a pair of medical scissors from his kit, he carefully cut the excess bandage and tied off a neat knot on my arm. "I don't know what type you are, miss, but you look tense. There's no pressure or commitment. We meet every weekend and you are always welcome. No need to force yourself." I nodded. It was a bit of a relief, knowing that my inevitable absence from this group was an expected outcome. Marcus extended his hand, which I took, getting ready to start moving again. "Good to go. There's not much longer, so try and hang in there." He smiled. I finished the hike with a slight limp. The pain in my foot wasn't as intense as it was before, but it still made it a bit difficult to maneuver through the gravel path. I wasn't really one to do this sort of thing. Hiking, that is. I was told a little nature would help with my generally sour disposition. It didn't. I hated types like our guide. It was difficult for me to navigate that kind of compassionate and outgoing attitude. The whole trip was full of corny jokes and over-enthusiastic descriptions of the surrounding terrain. I just could never engage with that kind of energy. And I think he noticed. After our little interaction when I fell, he decided it was probably best to leave me to my own devices. I appreciated it. I think that as a side effect of being outgoing and energetic, you become a lot more perceptive of those individuals who really want nothing to do with you. If anything, I respect people who have reached that level of awareness. There are lots who haven't. I got home absolutely drained of energy. I did what they told me to do, and as I thought, it didn't help one bit. I limped over to my fridge where a rudimentary checklist made from a ripped page of a college-ruled notebook was haphazardly attached via magnet. In bold letters was the title and Tara's recovery plan, with 3 checkboxes. Grabbing a nearby pen, I begrudgingly crossed off the item labeled Nature Walk and plopped down on the floor. If the universe is kind to me, I won't ever make it to the end of that list. I took off my boots, glancing between the wound on my arm and my foot. Especially if this is the result, I thought to myself. Slowly, I took my sock off, expecting blood. Or at least some kind of small object stuck in the cotton. I found neither. Instead, a small thread, no thicker than a strand of hair, stuck out of my foot. I stared at it with a furrowed brow. Strange. Before I could react or reasonably process what I was looking at, it quickly disappeared. A familiar sharp pain followed, causing me to recoil a bit. "What?" I muttered, unsure of what else to say. I rested my bare foot against my knee for inspection. The hole was small, almost imperceptibly so, but no one could mistake the slight writhing just underneath the tiny wound. Had a parasite unknowingly made its way into my boot during the hike? I think such a thought would have understandably caused panic in anyone else, but for some reason I felt apathetic. No, that wasn't quite right. Underneath that layer of calm indifference was a slight fascination. I placed my finger softly so as not to disturb the creature on the ball of my foot. It beat and pulsed near imperceptibly against the unexpected pressure, attempting in vain to loosen my skin as it tried to wrest itself free. I watched as it struggled painfully to preserve its own life. I took a moment to consider my next action. I could continue. I could squish the worm with nowhere else to go, its viscera and remains trapped under my skin, flagged as invasive, foreign, my body attacking and dispelling its waste until nothing was left. Or maybe I could preserve it, let it feast until I was hollowed out, a husk of skin loosely kept together by marrow and sinew. I was curious as to what would happen if I chose the latter. There was something alluring about the tiny creature, vulnerable and weak, finding that I, of all people, was the most appealing choice. It didn't take long to decide. I avoided putting pressure on the balls of my feet for the next few weeks. I doubt it was necessary, this amount of care, diligence, and effort. But it was the type of person I was. I wanted to be careful. I had chosen to take care of this little creature, so I would take the utmost caution in everything I did henceforth. That slithering feeling never left me. Every passing moment I could feel its movement within my body. It grew remarkably quickly. At first it could only navigate within the shallow interior of my skin, but as it grew, it began to burrow deeper and deeper into my flesh. It felt as if it was swimming throughout my internals, an ever-present reminder of the vast expanse of gore that was human anatomy. A sea of meat, constantly nourishing a grateful existence. It was painful at first, of course. As the worm grew, it began to wreak havoc. Every alarm bell screamed and pleaded for me to take action, to expel the foreign invader. I ignored it. Pain was something I could deal with given time, even pain of the unbearable variety. Perhaps as a result of its growth and expanded navigation throughout my organs and flesh, I began to vomit on an almost daily basis. It was a wet, crimson concoction of blood and other fluids. One night I could see small segments of the creature, white and resembling that of a maggot among the debris. Each section was at least 1 millimeter thick. The little worm had grown quite a bit since it had first invaded my body. Against my better judgment, I poked at one of the bits of worm I had expelled, which surprisingly wiggled and recoiled at the touch. In passing, I had heard of creatures that could reproduce through fragmentation. It works similarly to autotomy in lizards or starfish, except the regenerated segment instead grew into an entire entirely separate being. I couldn't help but smile. With a pasta strainer and a little bit of patience, I managed to recover all of the moving maggot-sized chunks of the worm and set up a tiny makeshift terrarium on my nightstand, utilizing a spare chafing dish I had lying around the kitchen. I watched as they struggled to navigate the smooth aluminum. I frowned. This won't do, I thought. I grabbed the dish and exited my apartment, practically running down the stairs to the front of the building, where there lay a small patch of greenery and dirt surrounding a large tree. I knelt down, digging my nails into the soil and carefully transferring it and bits of shrubbery into the tin, ignoring the confused and judgmental expressions of passers-by. Chirp! A nearby sound caught my attention. Chirp, chirp. I inspected my surroundings. A few feet to my left was a small sparrow, its visage a subtle, soft combination of browns and grays. The way it looked, it must have been a juvenile. I focused my attention upwards, into the branches of a nearby tree. Fallen from a nest, maybe? Chirp. I felt a pang of pity for the creature and crawled over to it, wanting to bring my face close enough to feel the warmth radiating from its pink, featherless skin. No. It wasn't just pity, it was something deeper, something primal, the instinct to provide, the instinct to feed. I could feel the worm thrashing and flailing within my torso and left arm, beating against my uneaten skin and muscle as if it too agreed. Its excitement spurred me to action. I grabbed the fledgling and carefully placed it within the improvised enclosure. Almost immediately, the chunks of worm, as if joined by one single mind, made their way toward the sparrow. Not wanting to make a scene, I quickly covered the tin, grabbed it, and ran toward the safety of my apartment. Chirp! Chee! The creature's cries suddenly stopped. I could feel the weight shifting greatly from side to side as the worm fragments slithered around, away from where I had placed the baby chick. I placed the tray on the kitchen table, hesitantly removing the lid. Only bones were left. The worms were remarkably efficient and clearly engorged. Before me were a couple dozen slightly larger parasites. Incredible, I said out loud. Upon inspecting what was left of the sparrow, I could feel the creature, the main creature, start to flail and slither toward my hands, toward the tin. My skin contorted and bulged in accordance with its movement until it got to my wrists, where it erupted in a bloody display at the base of my palm. Ah! I shouted in pain as it coiled around my thumb and ring finger with astounding strength, stabilizing itself and reaching toward the bones of the bird. What? There's nothing even left. Of course, it ignored my words. It hovered above the makeshift terrarium, and I watched, horrified, as its mouth expanded to reveal a proboscis with dozens of sharp, jet-black teeth. It shot out with blinding speed, completely engulfing the juvenile sparrow's remnants and covering them in a sticky, mucus-like substance. The shock must have worn off at that point, as I instinctively backed off from the display, forgetting that the creature in question was attached to me. I fell backwards, hitting my head hard and pulling it and the tin to the floor. The last thing I remember is those maggot-like fragments crawling toward me as I lost consciousness. I woke up a day later. My apartment was a mess, but otherwise I was all right. I felt different somehow and my head was ringing. I glanced over at Tara's recovery plan, which curiously had another list item crossed off. This one I had not done myself. Treat yourself to a nice meal. Upon inspection of my body, I noticed I had several new wounds, gouged out arbitrarily and without much of a pattern. The all-too-familiar feeling of slime and intramuscular movement greeted me soon after. Yet instead of being attached to one continuous body, it was localized over several locations. So they had decided to make me their home too. Within a few months, my palm started to resemble that of a lotus pod. The burrows were a few millimeters in width and connected such that I could interlace a wire between them if I wished. They were painful. I picked at the wounds frequently. White, cream-colored pus escaped the deep red pits, easily mixing with blood and streaking the substance with a grotesque pink hue. It was much larger now. Its movement throughout my body was visible even through a thin layer of clothing, displacing my skin to a degree I thought impossible without puncturing it. I was so harrowingly aware of its presence and routine. I felt each segment of the being intertwined throughout my figure with overwhelming accuracy, each curve, twitch, and slither as it used me for nutrients. I estimated it was about 5 meters long, much more than double my height. My appearance was ghastly, body riddled with holes and cracked skin, pale due to dehydration and blood loss. I stopped going out. I ignored calls from family and work. The few times I did have to leave for necessities, I wore heavy clothing and wrapped the larger holes in gauze to keep the bleeding to a manageable level. Anyone else would have stopped here and gone to the hospital, killed the things and moved on. Anyone else. But I had already made the decision that I would nurture its existence. I became obsessive. I stopped bathing in fear that it would endanger and drown the creatures. I gently nudged the parasites when I felt they were close to my feet or behind, so I didn't accidentally harm them when sitting or standing. As I felt my own body begin to fail and deplete in sustenance, I began to eat raw meat to supplement their diet. On occasion, I would spend time catching the rats that now riddled my filthy apartment. The worms would happily consume them from the inside as I grasped them firmly, exiting the holes in my palm and burrowing inside them with gruesome efficiency. It took less than 10 minutes for the creatures to devour the rats, and eventually the burrows throughout my body became so large that the creature would drag the rats inside me to feed them to their kin. The creature's new development came in the form of width as well as length. It bored a hole in my solar plexus so wide and deep that my ribs would easily be visible, had they not been obfuscated by the slithering intestines of the worms that now served as my provisional flesh. In the following days, I was in a near constant state of internal and external hemorrhaging and excruciating pain. Yet I lived against all logical explanation. I could only guess that the worm was sustaining me, somehow. I didn't know where all the blood was coming from at this point. No matter how much the worm consumed, I still bled. I was far past the point of questioning it. To be honest, I didn't much care. As long as the worm continued to feast, I was fulfilling my purpose. The more blood I lost, the more the worm changed. It began to take on the appearance of a bloodworm or a leech. Its teeth were visible, present on each segment of its body, rupturing and tearing me with each movement, and its body became maroon-hued. It was long enough at this point that it had coiled itself around my exterior, interwoven throughout my ribs and makeshift cavities. Where the creature ended and I began started to blur. My body is a cavern filled to the brim with writhing parasites. I thought of my internals, flesh and organs, how much of it was easily replaced by the worms. Each of my veins, limbs, intestines, and bones consumed and replaced by the creatures. I thought of my brain, slimy, wrinkled pink matter. I felt it move and contract in every passing moment. I don't have much in the way of feelings anymore. There was just this hunger, this devastating, ever-present desire to consume. It whispered into my ears, goading me into action. We were getting so tired of sustaining ourselves with rats. I stared at Tara's recovery plan, possibly for the last time. One item remained undone. Get involved with the local community. I think I know a certain group I could start with. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. I got a new job as a librarian. There are strange books here. I got a new job recently. I know that nowadays being a librarian isn't what it used to be. They're underpaid, overworked, and running on fumes. The lack of funding from local municipalities certainly plays a role, and the internet makes it so that checking out books can either be done entirely online or not at all. That said, I still think they're an important pillar of the community. A place where you can just be, where you don't have to spend money to exist, where you can simply pick up a book, sit down and read. While most libraries are run and funded by the municipality, this one wasn't. It was someone's private library that they've opened to the public. It was tucked away in a quaint little village, and it looked and functioned just like a normal library. Anyone can come in, apply for membership, and start borrowing. The only difference is that this library has a private section that was invite only. To be able to borrow from that section, you had to be approved by the owner himself. Not even I was allowed to enter that section. Only the head librarian and my manager, Johanna Lentz, had the key. One night, right before closing, a young man came in. I hadn't seen him before. He had thick, curly hair and deep brown eyes that had a gold sheen if you looked at it in the right angle. He greeted me politely and handed me his library card. It was one of the special ones. It said his name was Michael Lee, and it had a black border with intricate patterns to denote his special access. "Ah, welcome, Michael," I said, a little nervous. "How can I help you?" "I'm here to return a book," he said with a smile and handed me a tattered copy of Oliver Twist. It looked like it had the normal library sticker on the spine. I quickly sighed with relief. If he'd given me a book that belonged to the private collection, I wouldn't have been able to help him. Johanna had called in sick, which was a surprise because she seemed tough as nails. "Certainly!" I opened the inside of the book and stamped the return on the little leaflet. "Thank you very much." "No problem," Michael said. "Do you enjoy working here?" I nodded excitedly. "Oh, yes. I really enjoy working with books. I think they're special. So much knowledge, fun, and adventure in them." Michael smiled. "I'm glad you think so." He turned to leave before he seemed to remember something and turned back. "Oh, by the way, as you might have noticed, old Hannah is getting on in age. It's good that she has someone so enthusiastic like you." He looked at the Oliver Twist I was holding. "Say, would you like to have access to the private collection? I'm sure you'll be of great help." "Oh, I haven't been here too long, but I'd be happy to help Johanna out with the private collection." Michael nodded. "Just go put that book away, and I'm sure the big boss will give you the key." He turned around and waved at me as he walked out the door. "Good luck." I was a little confused as I was standing here with Oliver Twist. It was just a book from the normal collection, right? Sure, I might wander around a little to try and find the correct shelf since I don't have them all memorized yet, but I'll get it eventually. I set about to put it back. A hardcover Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, so DIC. The code was 0207020582. 02 for fiction, 07 for historical, 02 for children's books, 05 for 5th edition, and 82 for year of print. A bit of an unconventional system, if I may say. It takes some getting used to. To make matters even more complicated, the private collection apparently used an entirely different system, but that's neither here nor there. I walked over to the children's section, but before I was able to put it back, the dust cover slipped. I was a little surprised to see that it had one to begin with, as I could have sworn it didn't have a dust cover before. It was probably just glued on very well. I cringed a little. I needed to be more careful with these older books. I put the book down at a nearby table and started to readjust the cover when I noticed that the book itself wasn't Oliver Twist at all. It was a leather-bound version of Call of the Wild by Jack London, 1st edition, 1960. The leather was old and scarred, like it had really been in the wild. The title looked as if it had been sloppily carved out. At this point, I was angry both at myself and at Michael. At myself for not checking better, and at Michael for bringing the book in with the wrong cover. I sighed and went to put it back. Lawn 02070201160. I stopped again. The title shifted. It now read Vocatio Ferrarum. I stopped and frowned and flipped open to a random page. The page I opened was a double-paged illustration of the wild woods on a dark night, with our hero wolf dog standing on a rock looking down on me, his teeth bared and his eyes stark in the night. It seemed like he was beckoning me, daring me to come to him. I could almost feel the wintry chill on my skin, and my nose caught a whiff of frozen pine. I slammed the book shut, and the sensation disappeared. I slowly opened the book and looked closer at the inner cover, at the leaflet where I put down the stamp, from Hilford Jensen's private collection. I cursed inwardly. I couldn't call Johanna as she was sick, but I couldn't leave it here either. It seemed wrong somehow. I remembered Michael's good luck. I was beginning to understand why he said that. I decided to put the book in the back, and that was that. No more weird shifting titles or mistaken dust covers. I was just tired, and the setting sun was playing tricks. I started walking back when the lights flickered off. I stopped, suddenly standing in darkness. I thought it was still sunset, but now it was completely dark. When I looked outside, I froze. I saw a full moon high up in the sky. Something was so very wrong. It was 6 p.m., even if it would get a little dark. It was nowhere near the full moon. The smell of pines was stronger now, and I could almost feel the temperature dropping. I stepped back in surprise. It felt and sounded like I stepped on snow. I could hear something rustling between the shelves, a deep and guttural growl, and I stood very still. A wolf? Here? In the library? I held out a hand to try and stabilize myself on a nearby shelf, but all I could feel was the hard bark of a tree. I immediately withdrew my hand, but when I looked, all I could see was a shelf. I clutched the book to my chest, trying to find any comfort at all. The leather was icy cold. "No," I said softly. I couldn't believe what was happening. This isn't real. The growling got louder. "No!" I shouted this time and started running as fast as I could. I felt like a rabbit before the wolves, and I wished I could burrow somewhere safe, but I couldn't. I could hear panting and howling as the wolves ran after me. I jumped over the counter, straight through the door to the back, and slammed it shut behind me. I was in total darkness. I could hear the wolves scratching and howling at the door. I breathed a sigh of relief, but that was short-lived when I heard something growl in the darkness. I saw two golden eyes looking at me, glowing, as if emitting their own light. They were staring me down like I was prey. But I realized it wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the book. In its eyes, I could see a yearning for freedom, and that book could give it. Then all of a sudden, it lunged at my chest. I suppressed a scream and dodged. The wolf disappeared into the darkness. I followed the walls, flailing blindly, trying to find an exit, any exit. I could feel its claws scratch my legs, his barking ringing in my ear. I was kicking and screaming, and I felt my legs connect with something heavy. A yelp rang out in the dark. Finally, I found a door. It was open. I could almost cry in relief. I quickly went through, and with all my might, I closed the door, the wolf throwing his whole weight against it. I collapsed right there and sobbed. What was going on? What is this book? I tried to convince myself that it was all a dream, but it felt far too real. I felt my leg. It was bleeding where the wolf scratched me. I cried again, burying my head in my knees. I wished I never got this job. After what seemed like a long time, I noticed that the scratching and barking had stopped. I still didn't want to go out there in case they came back. It was only now that I started wondering where I was. The storage room only had one other door, the door to the private collection. I frowned. Usually a key was needed. I guessed that Johanna forgot to lock it. I felt the floor behind me, a step going down. It made sense that the private collection would be in the basement. I picked up the book and slowly went down the steps, feeling around carefully. The steps were uneven but smoothened over by age and use, as if they'd been there far, before the library was even built. I could feel strange carvings along the walls. Finally, the steps ended and the space opened up. I felt around for a light switch. I flicked it. It only lit up the first row of dusty books. I could see the outline of more rows, but they all disappeared in utter darkness. The books in the shelves were strange. I could immediately tell they were old, and so very similar to the one I was holding. I didn't want to enter, but I knew I had to make the wolves stop. The codes were different here, like I said, but I didn't know the logic behind them. Yet I noticed that the code itself was the same. I suppose the meaning behind the numbers were different. I laughed to myself. Why am I thinking about sorting with wolves in my library? I found an empty spot that wasn't as dusty, and to my relief, it seems like this was also where this book belonged. I put it back, and immediately the oppressing cold lifted from my skin. I couldn't smell the pine anymore. I couldn't hear the wolves. They were gone. I almost collapsed again from relief, but I stayed upright and went back up the stairs. In the library, the sunset was back. I went home. I don't know why, but I went back to work the next morning. I think I still half believed it was a weird dream and I was craving routine and normalcy. Johanna still wasn't there, but there was an envelope laying on the counter. It had a letter. "Excellent work. Congratulations on your new position." I sighed. I knew I should resign. I knew I should run the other way very fast and try to look for a different job. Yet at the same time, I knew I couldn't. I don't know why, but something had shifted in me. At least the position came with a hefty raise. Story 2 ends here now. We drift into Story 3. I work as a clown for a carnival in the middle of the desert. There is a man who clings to my ceiling and watches me as I sleep. His limbs are smooth and gray with an ash-like quality. His skin reminds me of the wings of a moth. He has no mouth, nose, or ears. He only has eyes twice as big as a normal human's. They do not blink, but they shimmer like moons reflected in rain puddles. I don't know why he's there. There must be some reason why he takes some interest in me. I wish I could understand it. He's not always stationary. Occasionally, he'll sit on the edge of my bed while I take off my makeup. Once he even cocked his head to the side, as if taking note of the curious ritual that is my nightly death. I do indeed die every night when I take off my face. I am born again in the morning, though I think born is too small a word. It's much more like a cruel reincarnation that I'm forced to go through every time the velour and silks fall off my body. My hat and nose are kept on my vanity like icons or patron saints, though I feel no comfort placing them there. It's not where they belong. I wonder if the faceless man knows these are my thoughts. I don't know. I've never bothered asking. He never bothers asking me anything, and it's my room anyhow. When I lie down in my cotton sheets, an old down pillow ready for burial under the cover of night, there is no one to place coins on my eyes for the ferryman. I am left to languish in a dreamless purgatory. No Hermes or Valkyrie leads me to death. No force pulls me from the bardo. I am left to wait in the tomb with my visitor looking down on me. Perhaps his eyes are the only coins I'll receive. Perhaps he'll come down one day and place them upon my own. I've decided to name him Gooby. I do not like instant coffee. It's disingenuous and tastes like burnt butter. That said, I drink it every morning. This is for several reasons, the least of which is that a singular mug appears on my end table daily, bearing the inscription "clowning around." The other reasons are personal and have to do with love languages such as gift-giving. and my general laziness in preparing anything else to drink. I think Gooby prepares it for me. I don't know. I didn't see him sitting on the edge of my bed that morning, so I imagine he's off doing something. Maybe he crochets. I wonder if he'd make me a hat. As I take my first sip of coffee and let its bitter warmth infest my veins, I stare at myself in the mirror and feel my blood run cold. This happens every morning without fail, and it never ceases to terrify me to my core. It is the kind of petrifying fear that you only get when noticing a figure at the corner of your vision. A stranger is watching me through the glass, drinking instant coffee out of a mug labeled Denora Gninwol Si. I don't recognize his face. I have a medical condition. Probably should have mentioned that, but better late than never. Doctors say it's something similar to depersonalization, derealization disorder, but it's not quite that. You typically feel like you're in a dreamlike state with DPDR and everything is supposed to move more slowly. I don't feel like I'm in a dream at all. Everything moves the same. Everything feels so vivid and focused that I sometimes almost vomit from motion sickness. No, I feel like I'm awake, aware, and painfully receptive to the horrible things of my reality. It's just my face. I never recognize my face. It's never the same to me. I can't tell if it switches forms or if my memory is simply that bad, but I am never at ease with it. My makeup is the only thing that calms me down. I start my ritual the same every morning. First is the white makeup, the canvas, the blank slate from which I carve my visage. Then comes the black, void, deeper than night and shadow, festering like a ripe spawn of the depths. Then I draw a little shamrock on my cheek because I like green. Finally, I force on my red eyebrows and smile. I apply enough powder to last through a hurricane, and finally I'm ready to go. I step out of my trailer and into the desert that I call home. What I stated in the title is true. I reside in a permanent carnival fixture that rests on the side of a near-endless stretch of highway in the middle of the desert. I have no idea what state I'm in, nor if I'm even in America. What I do know is that any mail I get is completely unmarked, save for my name, and it always appears at the doorstep of my trailer every week, anchored under a rock. I'm fairly certain the boss reads my mail, which is why my name is always misspelled on the envelope. But I don't care. I cook for myself, clean up after myself, and live alone in a trailer that I'm almost certain used to be a drug den. I cleaned it up, got rid of all the stains in the carpet, and now it is mine. I do find the occasional needle or bone every once in a while, but no home is perfect, especially around here. I'm not completely devoid of supplies, of course. There is a gas station about a mile down the road run by an elderly couple who swear I'm not the strangest thing they've seen walking into their doors at night. I am apparently the friendliest, which is worrying in its own regard. I use them to stock up on basic groceries and toiletries to get by, which is convenient considering that my pay is what many would consider abysmal. That said, in the instance that the boss sees this and decides to dock me for complaining, I'm joking. I don't have much I need to buy anyway, and scary as it may be, delivery services do still work out here. But that is my existence, and one that I'm stuck with. I have a gigantic orange tricycle that I ride when I don't want to walk, and a comfy set of size 20 shoes that get me the rest of the way. All in all, it's a steady job, but one I find taxing on the best days. I'll summarize it like this. I am a clown who does not talk. I never talk. I'm half convinced I can't, but even if I wanted to try, it wouldn't be with the people around here. Most of my co-workers are fine people as they are, but sometimes the scarier things come in the form of the guests. One of my talents is balloon animals. I can make almost anything proficiently. Sometimes I'll get the occasional person who wants to try and challenge me, and they'll try to order off the menu I carry around with my balloon bag. Many times they're innocent enough. Several children want their favorite cartoon characters or Tommy guns or insert exotic animal here. But on occasion, the requests can get a tad morbid. Today, I remember one corpulent little boy stopping me on my way to clean out the petting zoo to make such a request. "Can you make a spine?" he asked me. I stared at him for a second before raising my question mark sign. "You know," he repeated, "a spine? Like what's in your back?" The stare continued as a couple in matching Hawaiian shirts walked up behind him. They were assumed to be his parents, but they did not attempt to dissuade him. "Carter," said the woman in a distinctly shrill Minnesota accent, "don't be silly." "Carter, you know better," said the man with an almost shriller accent. "You have to be more specific. What kind of spine?" "Oh," the boy said with a wide smile. "Duh! Sorry, Mr. Clown, can I have a human spine, please?" I kept the question mark sign up. "Oh, it doesn't have to have a skull attached," the man laughed. "Sorry for the confusion. Just the spine itself would be nice for the boy." "Oh, maybe a pelvis," the woman added. "Good eating on one of those. Could you do that, Mr. Clown?" By this point, I had retrieved my whiteboard and expo marker to try and write out a more sophisticated response, but the woman cut me off. "You know," she said, reaching into her beach bag, "kinda like this?" Out of the bag, she proceeded to pull out a yellow spine, at least a meter in length. It was old, though not dusty, and had several gnarled splinters coming off of its vertebrae. I was hesitant to ask where she'd gotten it, but the man spoke up next to her. "Oh, would you look at that, hun?" he said, all sentimental. "That's from our first road trip, innit?" What was his name? Joe? No, it wasn't Joe. Hank? Dillion, said the boy. "You told me about that one." The boy's father ruffled his shaggy hair as he adjusted his sunglasses. "That's it. Wow. Look at the kid on this brain, hun, so mindful." "He sure is," the woman said. "That trip was before you were even born." "Ah, good memories, good memories." The father looked back at me with a smile. "So what do you say, Mr. Clown? Spine sound good?" He held out a 20. And if I were a prouder man, I would have been more apprehensive at taking it, but a 20 is a 20. I made the best spine I could, using every shade of white and bone yellow I could think of. And in less than a minute, the boy was holding his latex prize and beaming like it was Christmas. The parents thanked me and parted ways, and I can't recall seeing them the rest of the day. I went about my normal route through the petting zoo, the Ferris wheel, the Hall of Mirrors, etc. And it wasn't until this evening that I heard of anything wrong. A sheriff's deputy was at the gates by 6 o'clock and was speaking sternly with the head manager. The manager, Bill, an older man who always wore a striped jacket and straw boater hat, was making every disarming gesture in the book as he conversed with the man. Eventually, the deputy left and Bill locked the gates behind him. He passed by and gave a bright, "Evening, Bubbles." But I stopped him with my question sign. "Oh, that?" he said, smiling. "It's nothing. Just something for the boss to handle." I gave the sign another shake. "Oh, Bubs," he said, checking over his shoulder before leaning in. "They're just looking for one of the teenagers from back in town, that's all." He straightened his bow tie. "You know, Bradley, who works the tickets at the Ferris wheel? His folks called the sheriff and said he was supposed to be home hours ago. Never did clock out, come to think of it. Well, I don't know. He only tore tickets for one family today. Great tippers, by the way. And well..." He paused and held up his hands defensively. "I'm rambling. Point is, it's nothing for you to worry about. Go get some rest. We still have a few weeks until tourist season starts up again. Savor it all while you can." With that, he was off, and I was left feeling for the 20 in my pocket. There was nothing to be done. At the end of the day, there was no one to tell, and I didn't even have a name or vehicle to attach to any floating suspicions. Not to mention, it was getting late, and the gas station was at least half an hour away by trike. So I stowed my balloons, unlocked my ride from its fence post, and took off down the road. The gas station's glow was a fly light in the distance, and I was a moth with $20 to spend. Most children on a long car ride, for whatever reason, imagine some kind of being that runs alongside them on the road. It's always moving at impossible speeds, keeping time with every stop, turn, and acceleration. Pacing like a silent wolf through a deep bed of snow. I never had one of those as a child, but I do have one now, more or less. As I race my trike through the obsidian night, a single LED headlight gleaming, I sometimes see a pale figure, stark white and tall, bounding on the horizon towards the road. Sometimes, when I ride slower, I swear I can hear him howling something. He seems urgent, panicked even, but I can't make out his face. He's a blip in the twilight of the desert, a single pale flame shimmering on the backdrop of a purple void. If I wait even longer, his mournful voice sounds familiar to me, but even then I cannot recognize him. I've tried to name him, but nothing sticks. Chad didn't work. Didn't have the right mouthfeel, neither did Otis or Wheeler. He's such a simple-looking thing, and those are always the hardest to name. I've just started calling him that guy, and that works about as well as anything. He's always gone when I make it to the gas station, but he reappears on my rides back, still in the distance and still running. That guy is odd for sure, but in all the years I've seen him, he's never done me a bad turn. His presence, even if unsettling, reminds me that I'm not alone on my nightly ride. I blew him a kiss tonight in a dramatic fashion before entering my trailer. His howling evaporated as my door slammed shut. I brought Gooby back some peanut M&Ms and left them on my dresser with a note saying they were his. I didn't really think about how he'd eat them, seeing as he has no mouth, but I figured it was the thought that counted. I performed my ritual and stared briefly at the stranger in the mirror before me, trying to take in any solid feature, but I couldn't. I shivered and went to bury myself in the covers of my bed, but was met by something unexpected. There, neatly folded on my pillow, was a crocheted cap with a tassel on the end. It was a handsome thing and only vaguely smelled of vinegar. I put on, and that was enough inspiration to get me to write this. Long post, I know, but hey, I have a new hat. I think it's rather nice of Gooby to do, and I wanted to brag on him. If he does anything else brag-worthy, I'll be sure to post again. In the meantime, wish me luck and pray to whatever you may believe in that the gas station gets a new instant ramen flavor in soon. I'm getting tired of shrimp. Thanks for reading this far. Also, on a separate note, if you meet a Midwestern couple in Hawaiian shirts, maybe try being somewhere else, or make a balloon animal for them. Good night. Story 3 ends here. Now, listen closely to Story 4. I'm an author looking for inspiration, but I found something I can't explain. I sit here nursing the dregs of a now warm pint of golden cider, swirling it absent-mindedly while the pub around me sinks into the soft murmur of background noise. It's gone flat, sweet, slightly metallic. I don't mind. What I do mind is the relentless echo of the last few days looping over and over in my head. They've left me adrift, unmoored from everything familiar. Shaken something loose. I came here for inspiration. I think I found something else. I'm a writer, or I like to think I am. That worn-out stereotype, blocked, bitter, prone to staring out of windows and romanticizing decay. Ideas come and go like birds on a wire. Sometimes they perch long enough to give me hope, but most of the time, they fly off the moment I reach for them. 9 times out of 10, I'm left blinking at a blank screen, frustrated, talentless, thirsty. University did nothing to change that. If it had, maybe I'd be like my former classmates, writing young adult trilogies with film options or working cushy remote gigs as content creators for vapid media outlets. I saw one of them post the other day about how they'd been paid to write 15 actors who vanished after one season of Peaky Blinders, and it got 30,000 likes. 30,000. And here I sit with a lukewarm pint and a blinking cursor for company. The Bodmar Arms is the kind of pub you forget as soon as you leave. Perched on the outer bend of a coastal road, it's a 35-minute drive to anywhere that might reasonably be called civilization. The village it anchors isn't even listed on some sat-navs. The pub floor is warped and stained in patches. Walls are crammed with dusty oddities, brass plaques, yellowed photos, signed rugby shirts, and that ever-present cricket bat over the bar that looks like it's been used more for breaking up fights than scoring runs. There's a peculiar picture near my usual table, one I keep staring at even though I don't want to. A man and a woman smiling broadly, each gripping what looks like a dolphin between them. Only it's not a dolphin. Not really. Its flesh is dark red, almost veiny. It has no eyes, no fins, just a long, lipless mouth and rubbery skin like wet leather. I tell myself it's some rare Amazonian species, but something about it makes my spine twitch. Still, I digress. I came here to get away, to write, to force something out of my tired, anxious brain. I arrived 4 days ago, checked into the tiny room upstairs, and planted myself in the corner booth beside the window. I opened my laptop with a flick of the lid and watched the cursor blink at me. Mocking, silent, empty. Outside, the sea was a blank stretch of gray smudging into the horizon. Not a boat, not a gull, not even wind. Just a pair of buoys bobbing up and down like they were anchored to something trying to rise. Even the woman on the beach, metal, detector in hand, seemed to give up before she began. I watched her wave it once, twice, then sigh and walk back to her car. That kind of town. Eventually, I shut the laptop with a slap, scraped my chair back, and wandered to the bar. The stool I chose had once been upholstered in velvet, maybe red. Now it was threadbare and brown, the sponge beneath poking out in crusted, flaky lumps. I adjusted myself into some semblance of comfort. The barman was in the back, watching Doctor Who on an ancient portable TV. I recognized the voice, Tom Baker, dripping sarcasm at a Cyberman. "Hello, mate," I called, my voice overly bright with performative cheer. "What ciders have you got on tap?" He sighed, didn't turn around. "We've got cider, beer, or wine," he muttered, standing with the slowness of someone who's had enough of all things human. He waddled over, short, round, and sour-looking, and climbed a little step behind the bar to meet my gaze. "Right," I said after a pause. "Cider'll do." I carried the pint back to my table and opened the laptop again, hoping, foolishly, that the cursor might have started writing in my absence. Of course it hadn't. I went to the loo, more out of frustration than need. When I returned, 4 young men had taken the table opposite mine. Each had a pint in hand, and they spoke with the lazy rhythm of friends who had long since exhausted the need for introductions. I braced myself. I could smell the banter coming, but instead of stories about wild nights or Tinder disasters, the one in the black hoodie leaned forward and asked, "So lads, who's got a tale to spin this evening?" The others chuckled. One nudged another. After some light-hearted arguing, the one with thick neon-framed glasses leaned back and cleared his throat. All right, he said. "Here's one for you. Mad one, bear with me." He took a deliberate sip of his drink. "So this lad, Luke, goes camping with his missus. Longtime couple, childhood sweethearts, but things had been rocky. That night, big row, massive. He finds out she's been cheating on him, with his best mate." A low whistle came from one of the others. "Ooh, bitch." "Yeah," so he storms off, heads toward the cliffs to get some air. She follows, all apologetic, says it meant nothing, hugs him, says she loves him. He pauses, smiles grimly. Then, bang, knife in the back. The table jumps. Even I flinch. She pushes him. Over the edge, he falls. Sees stars spinning. Cold wind in his ears. Then, nothing. Just the sea. And silence. The table is silent too. I glance at my laptop. Open it slowly. The cursor is still blinking, but suddenly it doesn't seem quite so cruel. The tale haunted me through the night. It wasn't just the twist. It was the way he told it. Earnest. Measured. As if he'd lived it. I took the bones of it and spun them into a short novella. Just a rough one. Posted it anonymously to a writing forum I used to lurk on. Inspired by a tale overheard in a seaside pub, I wrote. Within hours, it started gaining traction. Comments, shares, even a message from an old uni mate. Mate, this is unreal. You finally found your voice. It felt like being seen for the first time in years. And so, of course, I went back. Day 2. Same table, same pint. I opened my laptop and waited. Sure enough, the group arrived, minus the storyteller from the previous night. No one acknowledged his absence. I didn't care. The lad with the shaved head and calm eyes took the lead this time. This one's weird, he said, but bear with me. He leaned forward, voice soft. Sam. That's the guy's name. Out on a boat with a couple of mates, Sam's into boating, takes it seriously. The others, not so much. They're pissing about. He doesn't mind, just wants everyone to be safe. Then a wave hits, big one of them falls in. Sam jumps in after him. Instinct, no hesitation. Gets him back to the boat. Other mate pulls him aboard, but Sam's not wearing a life jacket. He starts struggling, arms flailing, then something grabs him. Not water, not seaweed. A hand. Big, cold, clawed. He pauses. It pulls. Slowly, not yanking, like it knows it's won. I sit, transfixed. Sam looks down. Nothing but gray, but he can feel it, wrapping round his leg, not knowing if this was real or a figment of imagination in these last fleeting moments, pulling further and further down. And then, the cold becomes warmth, like a blanket, like sleep, and Sam's gone. I wrote all night, changed the names, added some ambiguity, kept the clawed hand. This one went viral. People messaged to say how it got under their skin, asked when the full novel was coming. I told myself I was only borrowing the tales, honoring them, that I was transforming pub chat into art. But really, I was feeding. Day 3. Only 2 lads now, the one in the hoodie and the quiet one with the pale eyes. They sat in silence. No pints, no laughter. Then the hooded one said, "Tell me, what is your tale?" The quiet lad stammered, I don't know. I don't know anything." "Then find one," the hooded figure said. "Know the story. Return when you are ready." The lad left, and then, for the first time, the hooded one turned to me. I didn't breathe. He stared, expressionless. Then said simply, "Sometimes reality is more compelling than fantasy." He stood and walked out. I stayed long after closing, couldn't move. Eventually the barman waddled over. "We're shut." I looked up. "Those lads, who are they? Come in every night, sit over there, you must have seen them." He frowned. "You've been the only one here most nights, you and the couple in the corner." I laughed, but he didn't. His face remained blank. No trace of irony, no hint of a joke. And this morning I returned again. The table by the window, their table, was occupied. An older couple sat there, heads bowed over an urn. The woman clutched a tissue. The man stared at nothing. I walked over slow, unsure why. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said gently. The woman looked up. Her face crumpled. "Thanks, love," she said. "Our Luke, he used to come here with his mates, loved this place." I felt the blood drain from my face. She sniffled. He died camping. Fell. Off the cliffs. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The door creaks open, the lad in the black hoodie steps in, but this time he's not alone. A new group trails behind him, older, quieter, faces pinched and pale. They sit. He doesn't look at me, doesn't need to. I open my laptop. The cursor blinks. A story waits, and I will write it. Story 4 ends here, and now we enter the fog of Story 5. I am not me anymore. The wall and I used to stare at each other. By that point, it was more than habit. It was a ritual. Me sinking deeper into the mattress, and it, blank, unblinking, mercifully indifferent. It asked nothing of me and gave nothing back. Some days I stared so long I'd start to see images in the texture, faces, landscapes, strange symbols, like the wall was trying to speak in a language only I could understand. Other days I thought it was staring through me, cataloging the soft ruin of my body from the inside out. That was before the mirror. I thought it might be helpful, comforting even, to see myself. I dragged my mother's old mirror out from the closet where it had been stored since she passed. A full-length thing cracked at one corner. I placed it across from my bed, angling it just right so I wouldn't have to move. Just lie there, watching, waiting. I remember how my reflection looked that first time I caught a glimpse, pale, sweaty, sunken. My mouth hung open without me realizing it, slack and useless, like I was already forgetting how to be a person. My hair clung to my forehead in greasy strands, matted in places where sweat had dried. A yellow stain bloomed across the collar of my shirt. Something spilled, or maybe something leaked from me. I looked like something recently exhumed, unwashed, unshaven, barely animate. I thought maybe if I saw myself falling apart, I'd want to stop it. Maybe the shame would ignite something, some flicker, some ember. But I only watched, and I only withered. I spent most days in bed, and the bed became something more than furniture. It was a grave I hadn't earned, a womb I refused to leave. The sheets clung to me like old skin soaked with sweat and time. I barely moved. I didn't need to. The world could happen without me. It already had. Getting up felt theatrical, unnecessary, like pretending. Even the basic urges, food, piss, pain, faded beneath the weight of stillness. The mattress had shaped itself to my body so completely that it almost felt like it was holding me out of love. A soft, warm embrace, a kindness I longed for but didn't deserve. Time didn't just pass, it dissolved. Days bled into one another, thin and formless, like smoke curling through the air. I didn't count them, I didn't care. Sleep came often, not as rest, but as retreat. It pulled me under like a drug, thick, velvety, dishonest. In dreams there was warmth, motion, laughter that didn't stick in my throat. My face looked like it used to, alive, animated, not sagging under invisible weight. I had cheeks that flushed, eyes that sparkled, a voice that didn't shake like glass. I loved it in that place, in that glowing nowhere. I was someone else and somewhere else. Or maybe I was just me before it took hold, before I became a passenger in my own body. Waking up was the cruelest part. Waking meant life, stink, heaviness. It meant remembering that I'd done nothing to stop the cascade. That every second I stayed there, it was my choice. Maybe I wasn't choosing. Maybe I just let the choice rot away like the rest of me. Through it all, the mirror never lied. It showed me exactly what I was, and exactly what I wasn't. I would stare into the mirror for hours, fixing my gaze on my own face until the edges blurred and warped, until my features no longer looked like features at all, but wet brushstrokes running down glass. Sometimes my nose would ripple, my mouth would stretch, my eyes would drift apart and sink into the hollows of my cheeks. Had my mind grown so sick of my reflection that it began to destroy it, or had the mirror simply grown tired of casting it? I blinked less and less. I didn't want to interrupt the melting. I wanted to see what I really was beneath the facade of flesh. I thought if I looked long enough, I'd find the truth in there, some core that explained everything. But instead, I found something worse. Some of the distortions didn't go away. My face would look swollen one day, then hollow the next, like it couldn't decide whether to blow up or implode. Eventually, my cheeks sagged, mottled with faint yellowish bruises that hadn't been there before. The skin beneath my eyes darkened and grew thin as if it were peeling away from bone. My lips cracked, turned pale, then blue at the corners, and then my hands. The nails yellowed, thickened, and curled slightly as if recoiling from the flesh beneath them. The skin on my knuckles dried out and split open in tiny weeping fissures. They looked like they belonged to someone long dead, exhumed, softened by weeks in water. Veins rose beneath the surface like gorging worms writhing when I moved. My flesh loosened. The bones underneath felt too sharp, too long, and wrong. And when I flexed my fingers, I sometimes heard a sound, like wet paper being pulled apart, and the smell, sweet and foul, like rotting fruit or meat left in plastic for too long. At first, I thought it might just be dehydration, malnutrition, some consequence of lying here too long, wasting away. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a side effect. It was a beginning. Something was happening to me, and I was letting it. I kept staring, every morning, every night, even when it hurt, even when it terrified me. The mirror didn't flinch. It just stared back at me, still, quiet, honest. I craved finality, an end to this horrible production I was watching in the mirror. I had thought about it so many times that the thought barely felt like a thought anymore, more like background noise, not some grand exit, no notes or drama, just an end, a full stop, a surrender. Finally, I convinced myself it was time, not out of bravery but exhaustion. I crawled out of bed, my knees cracked beneath me, unreliable and half numb. My hands were barely hands at this point, fissured, leaking, soft in places they shouldn't be. I found the sharpest blade I had, the carving knife my father used to use on holidays to cut the turkey or ham. It seemed fitting. I sat on the cold floor cradling it. Holding the knife took effort. My fingers didn't bend quite right. My tendons were too loose or too tight, I couldn't tell anymore. The handle slipped in my grip, slick with some thin yellow fluid weeping from the cracks in my palms. With great effort, I got the blade to my wrist. The flesh there was soft, discolored, a strange blue-purple like bruised fruit. It barely took any pressure. The edge of the blade sank into the skin like it wanted to disappear. The dimple was instant. The skin gave so easily it frightened me. One quick pull and I'd be free, but I couldn't. I sat there shaking, pressing the blade just hard enough to feel the first needle prick of pain. My breath caught in my throat. My heart thudded, slow, syrupy, uneven. My mind screamed, "Do it," but I didn't, couldn't. I wasn't afraid of dying. And so I failed, again. And somehow that was worse. The knife dropped, landing beside me with a metallic clank. I collapsed after it, curling around it like a child might cling to a favorite toy. I didn't cry like in the movies. There was no sound, no catharsis, just thick, wet sobs trapped in my throat. My body heaved, my face contorted, my chest convulsed. Another failure. Just one more. I lay there for hours, maybe longer, I don't know. Eventually, I dragged myself back into bed, leaving a trail of sweat and slime behind me. The mirror watched. I turned my face to it and whispered, "Coward." And then I stopped moving. I don't mean I chose to stop. I mean my body gave up on motion the way old fruit gives up on sweetness. It folded inward, crumpling slowly like a dying insect curling around its own failure. Movement became suggestion, then memory. My muscles tightened, then refused to relax. My joints seized, my skin began to harden. Not into armor, but something more fragile, more obscene, papery and pale, stretched tight across swelling meat. Cracks formed in the surface, thin at first like the silk of a spider's web, then deeper, splitting in places until thick, glistening fluid seeped from me, clear, mucosal, carrying the faint, sour stink of old wounds and stagnation. My spine twisted with a series of slow, deliberate pops, each one louder than the last, like someone breaking twigs under wet leaves. I could feel vertebrae pushing outward, rotating, repositioning into some unnatural architecture that no longer prioritized standing or sitting. My body was rearranging itself for a different purpose, something postureless, something permanent. My arms curled inward against my chest as though I were hugging myself in fear or prayer. The elbows locked into place like rusted iron bent too far. The tendons beneath the skin wriggled, tightened, then gave out entirely with a slow, warm tearing. My fingers, long useless, split and oozing, began to fuse at the joints, one by one, a grotesque knitting of flesh over bone. Several of them simply broke off at the knuckle, thudding to the floor with a soft, wet sound like raw sausages hitting tile. Something inside me moved. Beneath my ribs, a fluttering, rapid and erratic, like the heartbeat of something that should never have existed. I couldn't tell if it was an organ malfunctioning or some new thing gestating, alien and wet, struggling to find a place in a body not built for it. Then it stopped, just like that. The stillness that followed was worse, as if something inside me had died, and I was now its tomb. My stomach swelled grotesquely, ballooning outward with a slow, nauseating stretch. The skin turned taut and shiny, first green, then gray, then black, like a drowned corpse forgotten in the sun. It split slightly at the navel, leaking a brackish tar that smelled of bile and rot and something far sweeter, like an infection trying to charm you. And then my throat began to bulge. There was pressure, then the sensation of something pushing outward, up through the esophagus. A second jaw emerged, not fully formed, just teeth and meat and a twitching mass of cartilage that protruded through the soft tissue at the base of my neck. It didn't open, it didn't breathe, it simply sat there, forever clenched. A mocking grin that hadn't earned itself. My face was the last thing to surrender. My eyes refused to close. The lids had gone dry and cracked, then retracted entirely like blistered wallpaper curling from heat. The whites had turned yellow. The pupils dilated until they disappeared, until my entire gaze became an unbroken void. They bulged outward from their sockets, glossy and twitching, then dried in place like insects pinned under glass. I couldn't blink. I couldn't scream. I couldn't cry. The nerves were dead or too afraid. I stared. I stared because I had no other choice, and the mirror, still angled just right across from my bed, showed me what I had become. I don't sleep anymore. I just watch. Day after day, or maybe it's the same day repeated endlessly. I've lost the ability to tell. I stare from behind eyes that don't close, at a reflection that no longer flinches, no longer changes, only mocks. And in the mirror, I see what I have become. Not a rebirth, not a metamorphosis, a failure of becoming. Like an aborted butterfly, flushed from its cocoon before it could finish. Soft, wet wings never given the chance to dry. Legs too twisted to stand. Colors smeared and unfinished. A thing meant to emerge radiant, but instead expelled, shivering onto the cold floor of reality. This wasn't a transformation. It was a reflection made manifest, a monument to inertia, a shrine to every moment I told myself tomorrow I will do better. Sometimes I imagine the knife still in the kitchen. I picture myself doing it right, quick, clean, brave, but that person no longer exists. Maybe he never did. I see myself now always. No eyelids to close, no neck to turn away. Just the mirror. Just me. Just this. I am not me anymore. I am what happens when you wait too long to try. I am what's left when hope dries up and hardens into meat. And I am still here, alive, somehow. Story 5 ends here now. Settle in for story 6. He was my friend when we'd made the deal. I'm not sure what he is now. As I sit here to outline this cautionary tale for you, I realize how very young I was when this started. My heart breaks for that broken little boy, but my God, did he complicate things. The first part of the story, the part that I need you to learn a lesson from, begins about 3 weeks before my 16th birthday. I won't sugarcoat it. The truth of our circumstances here really do help to explain our decision-making. Terrible at best. Even as 16-year-old boys. We met as kids. We were both in the same emergency care home in Mississippi waiting on foster placements. As 11-year-old boys, we already knew adoption wasn't on the cards for us. We weren't exactly a hot commodity. In a strange way, we felt lucky that we had each other. We didn't really feel all that lucky about much else. So it was nice when both of us found foster homes in the same school district for a while when we were both 15. Felt like a gift, really. I'm sure you've heard this part before. A couple of vulnerable kids link up and become drug-addled statistics by their early teenage years. It was bad. Bad places, bad people, bad choices. Both of us, Carl and I, got pretty heavily hooked on meth and oxy. One night, just before I turned 16, the buddy I mentioned, Carl, had walked in on me. A state I'd put myself in on purpose. I'll spare all of the worst details. Thoughts that led me there and what Carl actually walked in on, and just say this. Carl saved my life that day. I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for Carl and his drive to keep me here. Now we thought it best we didn't involve any adults or reach out for professional help. We hadn't found adults to be particularly trustworthy or helpful, and we could only see the disasters that often came from involving an adult. We talked a lot that night. He made me promise that things would get better if I'd stick around. I said that I would, but I made him promise that he would kill me if things got much worse. I knew that I meant what I was asking of him. I'd already failed once, and I wanted to know that if things got worse, he would finish what I couldn't. If things got better, fine. He wins. I'll stay. If things got worse, fine. I win. He'll see me out. It seemed a fair deal. I'm not just killing you, dude, said Carl. I get what you're asking me, but what if your lust for life comes back just before I send you to the shadow realm? Carl, I mean it. I'll show you. Get me something to write on. I replied as I scanned the room with my eyes. And a pen. I spent the next minute or so whipping up an assisted termination document on the back of some overtly crude drawing that began as homework. Pen lid in my mouth and a grin from ear to ear, I signed my line with a flourish before placing it on the table and sliding it over to Carl with one hand. Okay, Mr. Sir, this is my proposed agreement. As you can see, I spiraled my finger around his name to draw his attention. This is you. He giggled at me, but then furrowed his brow and looked down. I guess he was finding the subject matter a little heavy. If things get bad, well, if things get worse and you can see that I'm not okay. He shook his head and opened his mouth to speak, but I continued. I need you to take me out the game. He sighed and encouraged me on with the raise of a brow. But first, you've got to show me a sign. Show me that it's on your mind. He gave me a, "Are you dumb?" with his eyes, and then followed with, "You want me to send you a sign that I am thinking about killing you?" I giggled. Yes, something that could only have been from you. No phones or emails, though I might miss it. He smiled at the idiocy. That would be tragic. "Mr. Sir, please," I said, mock serious. Step 2 is about trying to make me smile or laugh or something. If I can still smile, I might not be ready. See if you still can, you know? I nodded like a salesman trying to hypnotize a client. but he bought it and nodded with me as if what I was saying made any sense. Finally, step 3, using the end of my pen to accentuate my points. If after steps 1 and 2 I haven't pulled the plug on this operation, fill this out, now spiraling my finger around the date of death line. The pushback I'd paused for didn't come, so I continued. Fill the date of death out and return it to me that way. I can contact you any time up until that date to make it stop. I extended my pen to Carl, and he looked at me for a moment before he looked down and signed the paper. I was a little shocked. I did think that he might hesitate a little more, but he could see how desperate I was. My full name on the 16th May 2008, request that Carl's full name is to have completed his assistance to my termination at his discretion, as long as the following 3 steps have been completed without any pushback from my full name. A sign that it's coming. Show me that you're acknowledging that it's time for you to help me. Make me smile, see if you still can. Show me something that I can enjoy. If it makes me smile, I might not be ready. This contract. Return this contract to me with the date of death completed. That way I know exactly what to expect. Date of death. If all 3 steps have been fulfilled and my full name has afforded no resistance. Signed. My full name. Carl's full name. Because we were early teen drug addicts, we found it both hilarious and completely necessary to sign in blood too. Of course, so next to each of our names was our respective bloodied thumbprint. Edgy. I'd love to say that this is the most disturbing and intense deal that I'd ever made, but it's not even close. I'm getting a little ahead there, though. After we made the deal, we went about life as normal teenage degenerates for about 18 months. This was my personal rock bottom. A lot of shit went down, and long story short, it was 120 days in rehab or way longer in prison. I took rehab, and I remember this clear as day. On day 44, my girlfriend came to visit me. She was pregnant. I was changed. I loved Carl, and I meant it every single time I'd told him that I would wait for him. My baby girl got me to stay sober, but he didn't have that. I didn't judge him, and I prayed for him most days, but I couldn't bring him back into my life. It wasn't safe for the little family I'd built. I tried to be kind. I send money any time that I see he's back in county jail. I send letters when I know where he is living, and like I said, the day he comes to me and tells me he's done with the drugs and he wants to change, I will help him. Well, I would have. The next day that is important was not too long ago now. It was October last year, 2024. I'd not long since been home from work in the evening when I heard my dog barking. No doorbell or knocking though, so I let it be. A minute or so later, he'd started barking again, so I thought I'd just give the porch a once-over. As I got to the porch, I could see through my front window that something had been left on my doorstep. But whoever had left it had got a head start, given that I'd ignored the dog the first time. Upon opening the door, I was hit by a stench that I am all too familiar with as a born and bred Mississippi resident dead animal. I couldn't source the smell immediately, and my attention was pulled to a little metal lunchbox on the doorstep, one that a kid would use. Kind of old-fashioned. I'm not sure how I didn't connect these dots sooner, but the smell was coming from the lunchbox. A discovery that I made unintentionally as I picked the lunchbox up and the contents spilled onto the floor, a dead crow and a burned-up spoon. My brain was scrambled initially, but I felt my body understand what was happening before my brain caught up. I knew this lunchbox. It was Carl's stash box from when we were kids. This spoon I knew pretty intimately, too. The bird was a reference to a story from when we were younger. Again, I'll spare you the gore, but essentially there was a guy who I owed a lot of money to. And one day, to send a message, he'd left a dead crow on my doorstep, too. Confusion and disbelief plagued me for a day or two as I tried to contact Carl through various means, all of which proved futile. A very weird, practical joke, I thought. I hadn't even considered the contract. 2 days after the lunchbox, I'm pretty much calm now, and I'm just pulling up at home after a week's worth of work on a Wednesday. And as I step through my door, I kick a stack of letters that have been pushed through the postbox. After taking care of some personal restroom matters, I tracked back through the house and picked up the letters. The very top letter was the problem. Resting atop glossy leaflets and white posted envelopes was a small, square birthday card-type envelope with nothing addressed on it. No words at all, no postmark, no stamp. When I picked this envelope up, I could feel from the weight distribution that whatever was in this envelope was smaller than the envelope itself. My curiosity piqued. I was careful when opening it not to damage what was inside. An effort wasted when the shock of what I saw caused me to drop it entirely. It was a Polaroid picture of Carl and I. Only Carl's face had been scratched out for the most part, and a huge, creepy, smiling mouth had been plastered over mine. Writing these words, I don't know how this didn't prompt me to think about the contract. But I didn't. I thought maybe Carl was in a bad patch, lashing out at someone who escaped the cycle. I didn't blame him. I spent some time that evening reminiscing and thinking about Carl, thinking about the days I spent making bad choices. I thought a lot, but I didn't think about that deal we'd made. That night, my mind wandered back to the Polaroid. I'd scooped it up with whatever else had been posted that day after I'd dropped it in my earlier shock. I couldn't recall when we'd taken this picture, so I thought I'd go look again. I still couldn't really tell, but what had my attention in this moment wasn't the photograph. It was a few mail items back in the pile. It was a white envelope, A4 sized with the hardback. There was nothing on it, though. The envelope was entirely blank. Just like the envelope that housed the Polaroid earlier, my stomach churned and my fingers suddenly felt like worms. Something was terribly wrong, my body knew before my brain. I'll have to finish this tomorrow. Getting it all out feels good, but it's a lot to get through in one night. This was just the beginning. The 6th story has come to an end. Now it's time to knock on the door of the 7th. White Death. The White Death is a creepy story about a vengeful spirit in Mexico who hunts down anyone who knows about her existence. I am currently sitting in front of my computer, scared witless. Every moment could be my last. My friend is here with me, and he is the sole reason why my life is in danger. It may not make sense at first, but let me explain. It all started earlier today when a friend of mine burst into my house and slammed the door behind him. His eyes were wide with fear, and he stood there with his back against the door, breathing heavily. I asked him what had happened, and he told me this story. He had been living with his aunt for the past year because his parents were in Mexico. They were doing mission work at a small hospital in southern Mexico. The previous night, a bedraggled man had stumbled through the entrance of the hospital. He was screaming in Spanish and appeared to be out of his mind with terror. They brought him over to a chair and let him sit down. As he caught his breath, he told his story in broken English. He claimed that his sister had been killed by something he referred to as La Muerto Blanco. He kept saying that it was coming for him next. Confused, they asked him who or what a Muerto Blanco was. With a look of unfathomable fear on his face, he said that La Muerto Blanco was the White Death. She is the soul of a girl who died years ago. She died by her own hand, he said, alone and unloved. She hated life so much that she wanted to remove all traces of herself from the earth. So great was her desire to completely obliterate her memory that she returned from the dead as a vengeful spirit bent on killing all those who knew of her existence. She is a girl, but not a girl, he said. She's not dead, but not really alive. She has cold black eyes that weep blood. She walks without ever actually seeming to move an inch. She stalks her victims like a wild animal, pursuing them across rivers and valleys, trailing them back to their homes. You are never really aware that she is following you until you hear her telltale knock upon your door. She knocks once for you skin, which she'll use to patch her own decaying flesh. Twice for your hair, which she'll gnash between her teeth. 3 times for your bones, which she'll fashion into clubs. 4 times for your heart, which she'll tear out of your chest. 5 times for your teeth, which she'll polish and keep in a box. 6 times for your eyes, which she'll pluck out one by one. 7 times for your soul, which she'll swallow whole. No matter where you go, the White Death will track you down and you will hear her terrible knocking begin on the door. You can try to outrun her, but she's faster than any mortal man. If you flee from your home while she's knocking on your door, she will follow you wherever you go. The terrified man was certain that this thing had killed his sister. He had tried to tell the police about the White Death, but they would not listen, dismissing it as an old wives' tale. Next, he had tried to tell his priest, but the priest immediately shut the door of the church in his face and turned him away. The priest had seen the White Death following him, he said, and did not want to get involved. With his head in his hands, the frightened man said that the White Death follows you forever until you tell someone else about it. Then it strikes. It kills you and begins following the person you told. After finishing his tale, the man stole a car from the mission hospital parking lot and vanished into the night. Apparently, my friend's mother and father had immediately called his aunt and told her about the strange man they had encountered. They asked her if she had ever heard of the White Death. She said she had not, and they proceeded to tell her the story that the man had told them. The aunt got a phone call later that night. It was the Mexican police. They told her that the parents had been found dead outside the hospital. They had been torn apart. My friend's aunt had immediately called him at school to break the bad news to him. As he cried, she told him she couldn't understand what had happened. She recounted the whole story to him, telling him about the strange man who had turned up in the hospital just hours before his parents were found dead. She told him how the man had given his parents a weird and disturbing story about something called the White Death. When he hung up the phone, he had struggled to come to terms with what had happened. It almost didn't seem real to him. When he got home after school, he found the front door of his aunt's house standing open. Inside was a trail of blood leading into the kitchen. There on the kitchen floor, he found his aunt's dead body. She had been torn limb from limb. He ran out of the house and all the way across town, never looking back until he reached my house. As he told me this story, I could hardly believe it. Within the space of a day, his mother, his father, and his aunt had been murdered. It all seemed too far-fetched. But before I could utter a word, my friend and I both recoiled in horror as we heard a knocking begin at my front door. We've been staring at the door for an hour now, neither of us wanting to open it. The knocking is still going on, growing louder and louder. She never gives up. She never quits. La Muerto Blanco is unstoppable. I think she wants to scare us, my friend and I. I think she wants us to blame each other, and I do. I blame my friend. It's all his fault. He should never have told about her. As I sit here in my house beside my friend, both of us listening to that hideous knocking growing ever louder, I wish a lot of things. I wish she had killed my friend before he reached my house. If he had never been able to tell me about her, I wouldn't be in danger now. I'm sorry I ever met him. And I'm sorry for you too. I'm sorry I made you read this story. I'm sorry I ever told you about the White Death, because now that you know about her, she'll be coming for you next. The 7th story fades with the sound of rain, but something darker now begins to stir. This is the 8th story. It's House on Fire. House on Fire is a scary story about 3 friends who spend a night telling scary stories and encounter a legend that becomes frighteningly real. Let me tell you about the night my life changed forever. The night when I thought I was going to die. The night I lost my sanity. It was a warm spring night and I was 13 years old. My parents had gone on holiday for the weekend, leaving me home alone. I invited my two best friends, David and Arnold, over to keep me company. We were in my bedroom listening to music. Arnold reached out and lowered the volume. "Hey, why don't we tell some scary stories?" he said. "I'm in the mood for a scare." "Sounds like a good idea," David agreed. "Who's going to go first?" I have one," I volunteered. "But, I don't know if I should tell it." "Come on," said David. "Let's hear it." "Okay," I said. "It's a pretty terrible story I heard once. It all happened many years ago. There was a man who had a 7-year-old son. His wife had died giving birth to the boy. They lived way out in the countryside and there were no neighbors for miles. They didn't even have a phone, because at the time, the lines didn't stretch out that far. One day the father came home from work and he was horrified to find that his house was on fire. He immediately thought about his young son and he rushed inside, calling the boy's name. When he heard his son answer, he realized the poor boy was trapped in his bedroom. The father ran to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. A beam had fallen from the bedroom ceiling and blocked the door. He banged and banged on the door with all his might, but it was too solid. He even rushed against it with his shoulder, trying to break it down, but it was no use. All the time, he could hear his son screaming. The boy was in a panic, screaming and crying out for help. The man kept trying to batter down the door, but no matter what he did, it held firm. He shouted in rage. He wailed in despair. He no longer thought about anything else, just the door and his son screaming on the other side. His son burned to death in the house. The father died too. He never managed to open the door, and he stayed there to the end, desperately trying to break it down until he succumbed to the smoke and the flames. Arnold looked at me in disgust and said, "That's not scary." "I have to admit it's pretty weak," David agreed. "It's more sad than scary." That's when I decided to tell them the last part of the story. I hadn't planned on telling them that part, but I got carried away trying to impress them. It was so stupid to continue. I should never have told them. "Wait, you don't know the rest of the story," I said. "Ever since then, the father's ghost is still trying to open the door and save his son. And if you say, well, I'd rather not say the exact word. But basically, if you call him and tell him that everything is burning and ask him to come and help you, his ghost will appear at your door and take you away." David looked at me thoughtfully. "Have you ever tried it?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I'd be too scared to test it out." Arnold had a gleam of excitement in his eyes. "Hey, we should do it right now," he said. I tensed up. I had no desire to summon a ghost, and I was already sorry I had said anything about the legend. David smiled. "Yeah, why not?" he said. I was going to tell them that I didn't want to do it, but they didn't give me a chance. Arnold put on a trembling voice to imitate the little boy and screamed, "Daddy! Daddy, help me! The flames are all around me! I'm scared!" Then he burst out laughing. I didn't crack a smile, but him. He laughed. David watched him with amusement, saying nothing. Arnold started screaming again, even louder this time. "I'm burning, Daddy! I'm burning! Help!" "Stop it, Arnold, it's not funny," I shouted. I didn't mean to, it just came out of me. I was really scared and I didn't want to hear him anymore. "What are you afraid of?" Arnold laughed. "Oh, come on, it's just a stupid story, that's all, and not even a good one." With a smirk, he continued, "Daddy, please help me, the fire is burning me alive, All of a sudden, there was a loud knock on my bedroom door. Arnold stopped in mid-scream. We all froze. There was an eerie silence. We all looked at each other. None of us made a sound. Boom! 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 We almost jumped out of our skin. Boom! 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 "What's that noise?" Arnold exclaimed. "If this is a joke, it's really not funny," said David. His face was white as a sheet. The banging on the door continued. Then we heard a man screaming. Those horrible cries will remain forever etched in my memory. I can still hear them now. It sounded like the cry of a dying animal. It was inhuman and infinitely sad. The banging against the door and that horrible scream continued relentlessly. I was terrified and tried to hide behind the wardrobe. Arnold grabbed a chair and stood poised to strike anyone who entered the room. David curled up against the wall. Tears were streaming down his face. "No! No!" he cried. "What is this? I'm scared!" Immediately, the screaming outside the door grew stronger, even more harrowing, even more terrifying. The banging on the door grew louder. I thought it was going to fly off its hinges. Then panic seemed to overcome David. "I can't take it anymore," he wailed. "I've got to get out of here." With that, he ran to the window and opened it. "No!" I cried, "don't." But before I had time to finish my sentence, he jumped out the window. I heard him fall. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then I heard him cry out in pain. "Ah! I fell! I'm hurt! My back! Aha! I'm hurt!" I ran to the window and looked out. David lay on the concrete downstairs, screaming in pain. The screaming coming from behind the door got even louder and more crazed. The banging increased. I was going crazy. It was all a relentless nightmare, and David's screaming only added to the horror of the situation, especially since Arnold and I were too scared to leave the room to help him. Then I smelled something. I hadn't noticed it at first, but now the air in the room was filled with an awful stench. It was suffocating, the smell of burning flesh. It was unbearable. I turned away from the window and saw Arnold standing motionless in the middle of the room. His eyes were wide and he was staring at the door as if in a trance. Then he bent over and vomited on the carpet. The banging, the screaming, the shouting, the stench of burning flesh, and the sight of Arnold spewing was all too much for me. I began to throw up as well. I leaned back against the wall as David continued to howl outside and the furious knocking on the door continued. Then I had an idea. Maybe David's cries outside were attracting the man outside the door. I closed the window. We sat on the floor with our hands over our ears, shaking in terror as the cataclysmic blows against the door continued unabated, and the awful cries pierced our eardrums and the burning stench mixed with the smell of our vomit. Gradually, the screams died down, the smell subsided, and the banging on the door grew weaker and weaker until finally everything was silent. All we could hear were David's muffled cries of pain through the closed window. Arnold looked at me and asked me in a low voice, "What do we do now?" "Maybe we should call the police," I said, "or the fire department, or, I don't know, an ambulance to help David." "Where's your phone?" he asked. "Downstairs." "Do you think it's gone?" "Well, it's quiet," I replied hesitantly. "That's right," he said. "We'll have to go down." "Well, I'll go. Anyway, it's gone, right?" "I guess so," I said. Arnold got up slowly and hesitantly walked to the door. He gently seized the handle and pushed the door open and peeked into the hallway. It was empty. Then, with a smirk on his face, he turned to me and said, "It's crazy. The door was open all the time, this stupid ghost." But he didn't have time to finish his sentence. In a flash, a hand came around the door and grabbed Arnold around the neck. He stood there petrified, without screaming, eyes wide in terror. The arm was blackened and charred. I could smell the burning flesh. Before I had time to react, Arnold suddenly disappeared right before my eyes, dragged through the doorway and whisked down the hall at an impossible speed. The door slammed shut with a deafening clatter. I got to my feet and ran to the door, but I didn't dare to open it. I called Arnold's name again and again, but there was no response. I still couldn't bring myself to open the door. I was afraid that the charred man was still there. Nobody ever saw Arnold again after that night. My parents took me to a psychiatrist. I never told her anything or anyone else, not even my parents. They would never have believed me anyway. David did the same. He spent a month in the hospital. He broke his back in the fall. Even today, I still have a fear of opening doors. I'm terrified of what I might find on the other side. As the 8th story dissolves into the downpour, the 9th begins, deeper, colder, and harder to forget. Storm. Friends Forever. Friends Forever is a spooky urban legend from Spain about 2 young girls who take a blood oath promising that they will always be together. There were 2 15-year-old girls named Alice and Sarah who had been best friends since early childhood. They lived in the same neighborhood, attended the same school, and went to the same classes. In short, they were inseparable. However, they very different characters. While Alice was cheerful and outgoing, Sarah was very shy and quiet. One day, Sarah and Alice were talking about their friendship. "Do you think we'll be best friends forever?" asked Alice. "I think so," replied Sarah. "Why wouldn't we?" "I don't know," said Alice. "Sometimes when people get older, they grow apart." "I have an idea," said Sarah. "Let's take a blood oath." "A what?" asked Alice, surprised. "A blood oath," said Sarah. "Look, we both have to swear that we will be BFFs, best friends forever. If we ever lose touch, we both swear that we will do everything we can to make sure we will be together forever." "That's nonsense, Sarah," said Alice. "We won't lose touch. We'll always be together." But Sarah continued to insist, and with a mixture of amazement and amusement, Alice finally agreed to the proposal. Sarah found 2 needles and handed one to Alice. The girls took a piece of paper and wrote "Best Friends Forever" on the top and then signed their names at the bottom. They lit a candle and heated the tips of the 2 needles in the flame. Taking their needles, both girls pricked their index fingers and each smeared a drop of blood next to their signature. Their blood oath was now sealed. As the years passed, the girls grew up and left school. Alice went away to college in another city, while Sarah stayed in their hometown and got a job in a local store. Both of them got boyfriends and fell in love. The girls still kept in touch by phone, calling each other at least once a week. When Alice had completed her law degree, she got a good job and decided to get married. The couple bought a house and settled down. A few years later, they had a beautiful baby boy. Alice was so busy with her family that she rarely found time to call Sarah. It wasn't long before the phone calls stopped completely and the friends lost touch with each other. Although Alice would sometimes still think about her best friend from her youth, she never took the trouble to pick up the phone and call her. In the end, life had led the 2 women down different paths and they had not seen each other since they left school. One night, Alice had a horrible nightmare. She was driving along an endless highway when suddenly a truck in front of her began to swerve into her lane. The truck skidded and then collided with her car. She woke up suddenly soaked in sweat. Just as she was trying to calm herself down, she heard her front doorbell ringing. She glanced at the clock by her bedside and realized it was after 3 a.m. Her husband was fast asleep on the other side of the bed. At that moment, the doorbell rang again insistently. Wondering who could be coming to visit at that time of night, Alice got up, threw on her nightgown, and went downstairs. When she opened the front door, she was shocked to see a woman standing on the porch. The woman was terribly pale, extremely haggard, and had a huge bleeding wound on her forehead. Although she had changed a lot, Alice recognized her immediately. It was her old friend, Sarah. "OMG, Sarah, what happened?" she cried. Sarah just stared at her. "Come in out of the rain," said Alice. "Are you hurt?" Sarah didn't move from where she was. "What's wrong, Sarah?" pleaded Alice. "Long time no see, Alice," hissed Sarah. "I've come to fulfill my promise. I've come to tell you I died." Alice was speechless. Sarah held up her hand and pointed at Alice with her index finger. Her finger was dripping blood. Life has separated us, Sarah continued, but we will be together in death. I'll be waiting. Alice fainted and collapsed on the ground. The next morning, when Alice woke up, she found that she was lying in bed next to her husband. She rubbed her eyes and wondered if the events of last night had all been just a bad dream. At breakfast, she turned on the television, and what she saw chilled her to the bone. The local newscaster was saying that the night before, at 3 a.m., there had been a fatal traffic accident. A truck had collided with a car on the highway. The driver of the car had been killed on impact. The driver of the car was a woman named Sarah. From that moment on, Alice's life became a living hell. She barely ate a thing. She forgot to pick up her child from school, and when she went to work, she couldn't concentrate on her job. Every night, she had the same terrible dream. She would awake to the sound of the front doorbell ringing. She would open the door and find Sarah standing there, her bloody index finger pointing straight at Alice. Each time, she said the same thing: "I'll be waiting." Each morning, Alice awoke in a cold sweat. She looked down and her bedsheets would be streaked with blood. She felt an excruciating pain in her finger, and when she looked, her finger was covered in blood. Her husband did not understand what was happening. He took his wife to see a doctor and a psychiatrist, but neither of them could find any explanation. Alice's condition only grew worse, and in her nightmares, she began seeing Sarah standing at her bedside, pointing with her bleeding finger. One night, the husband was awakened by a dreadful noise. It was the sound of breaking glass. He ran out to the bathroom and discovered that the window was broken. Peering outside, he saw Alice lying on the sidewalk, her limbs askew. The horrified man rushed downstairs and out the front door. There was a pool of blood around his wife's head. Beside her, on the pavement, someone had written in her blood, "Friends forever." The 9th tale ends, but the rain doesn't stop. And neither do the whispers. Welcome to the 10th story. The House That Whispers. Part 1. Introduction. Arrival. I should have left when I saw the attic light flicker, even though no one had been up there in years. But I didn't, because it was the only house I could afford, and because I didn't believe in ghosts, at least not back then. My name is Rachel Wyatt. I'm a high school English teacher. 2 months ago, I inherited a century-old house from my Aunt Margaret, a woman I barely knew, the kind of family you only hear about in probate letters and vague childhood memories. I moved into the house on a Saturday. It was late fall in northern Michigan. The trees were bare, the skies were gray, and the wind carried that still, sharp cold that cuts through your jacket and settles into your bones. The house stood 3 stories tall. Old timber, peeling paint, porch swing half detached, roof with moss like an old scalp. But it was mine, free. All I had to do was live in it for 6 months, as the will required. 6 months in exchange for a mortgage-free future. I had no idea what those 6 months would cost me. Part 2. The First Whisper. The first night was uneventful, unless you count the raccoons fighting in the attic and the faucet that wouldn't stop dripping even when turned off. I lit a fire in the old living room hearth, made some chamomile tea, and unpacked a single suitcase. Everything else was arriving Monday. Around 2:30 a.m., I climbed the creaky staircase and settled into the 2nd floor bedroom. The wallpaper was floral and faded. The ceiling fan groaned when I turned it on. I lay down in the antique bed and stared at the shadows on the ceiling. Sleep came reluctantly. And then, Rachel. The voice was so soft I thought I'd imagined it. It wasn't loud, it didn't scream, it was more like a breath, like someone whispering into my ear. "Are you awake?" My eyes opened. The room was pitch black. No movement, no sound. I told myself it was a dream. I would keep telling myself that over and over. Part 3. The House Breathes. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been stress. First night in a new place. Strange creaks, new sounds. My brain just hadn't adjusted yet. But then I noticed something odd. The mirror in the upstairs hallway, the long oval one that faced the staircase, was fogged over. The house didn't have central heat yet, and I hadn't taken a shower. I wiped it with my sleeve and paused. There was a handprint, small, child-sized, pressed right at the center of the glass, fingers splayed outward. But no one else was in the house. I checked the windows. Locked. Front door? Still chained? Attic? I hadn't dared go up there yet. Maybe it was an old stain, a smudge. That's what I told myself. I taught class remotely that day, but I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept drifting toward the shadows in the corners of the screen, like I was being watched. That night, I drank a glass of wine and took a sleeping pill, anything to avoid the whispers. But I woke up anyway. 3:13 a.m. every night, exactly the same. "Are you awake now?" This time the voice came from inside the room. My body wouldn't move. My eyes were wide open, my chest was frozen, my limbs felt like concrete. And I heard it again, a slow, dragging breath just beside the bed. Then the sound of a nail dragging down the wall. Shriek. When I finally moved, I bolted upright and switched on the lamp. No one was there, but the wallpaper beside the bed had a new tear, vertical, jagged, like something had clawed downward. Part 4, the rules of the house. By the end of the first week, I stopped sleeping. I kept the lights on, kept music playing. I even tried spending the night in the living room downstairs, but no matter where I went, the voice followed. It never screamed. It never rushed at me. It simply whispered, patient, curious. "Why are you awake? Who let you in? You should be asleep by now." Then came the dreams, one if you could call them that. In one, I stood at the top of the attic stairs. The hatch was open and a voice called from below. "Come down." I refused. I woke up with my feet covered in dust, attic dust. I finally called a local locksmith and had the attic door sealed shut, bolted from the outside. Then I nailed a cross above it. That night I still woke up, but this time the voice said, "There's more than one way down." Part 5, Aunt Margaret's Secrets. 3 weeks into my stay, the lawyer who'd handled my Aunt Margaret's estate called unexpectedly. "I forgot to mention," he said, "your aunt left behind a trunk in the basement. It's marked with your name." I hadn't gone down there yet. I was already scared of the attic. The thought of a shadowy, mildew-soaked basement made my skin crawl, but curiosity overpowered fear. That evening, I went down the narrow, groaning wooden stairs into the dark. The basement was colder than the rest of the house. My breath fogged. The single bulb overhead flickered as I pulled the chain. The trunk sat in the corner, oak, heavy, locked with 2 rusted latches. I opened it. Inside were papers, diaries, old photos, most faded, and a single voice recorder. I pressed play. The tape crackled for several seconds. Then my aunt's voice, weak and tired. "I should have burned this house down." A pause. Then, "It doesn't just whisper. It listens. It waits. It watches you while you sleep, and if you wake up, it learns your name." She went on to describe her own sleep paralysis. The same voice. The same 3:13 a.m. visits. One entry chilled me. "Don't answer it. Whatever you do, it knocks, it calls. But if you answer, it comes inside." She said she sealed the attic because that's where it entered, come, or maybe escaped. She wasn't sure, but the worst part? It doesn't want the house. It wants a host. Part 6, the guest room. I stopped teaching, I stopped showering, I stopped answering texts. All I did was wait. Every night the same routine: tea, fire, lights on, prayers whispered, cross-checked, attic bolts confirmed. And every night, 3:13 a.m., I woke up to the voice. Sometimes at the door, sometimes under the bed, sometimes in the mirror. "I can help you sleep." I once screamed at it, told it to go away, that I wasn't afraid. The next morning, my reflection was smiling before I was. I tried leaving, packed a bag, got in my car. The battery was dead, so was my phone. So was every light in the house when I stepped back inside. That night I slept in the guest room. A change of scenery, I told myself. At exactly 3:13 a.m. I woke up facing the closet. It was open. Inside stood a figure, tall, hunched, skin like wax, no mouth, only a throat that pulsed and whispered without lips. Thank you for answering. Part 7. When whispers become voices. After that night in the guest room, things changed. The whispering stopped being occasional. It became constant, in the walls, in the floorboards, in the pipes when I turned the faucet, in the damn fireplace. And now it wasn't just calling my name, and it was calling others. I heard voices that weren't mine. "She's awake again. No sleep, no sleep, no sleep. The bed's too warm, let's make it cold again." The house had become a chorus of lost things. I started hearing Margaret, my aunt, sometimes begging, sometimes humming. Once I found her photograph face down on the floor, though I'd never taken it off the mantel. On the back, someone had scrawled, "She let it in." I took a hammer and went up to the attic, ready to tear the bolts apart and confront whatever was haunting me. But when I reached the top of the stairs, the door was already open, inside complete darkness. I shone my phone flashlight. Nothing. Then a child's voice, a boy's this time, whispered directly beside my ear. "Rachel, it's not in the attic anymore." Part 8. The door in the floor. 2 nights later, I found the trapdoor. Not in the attic, not in the basement, but under the rug in my bedroom. A small square of wood with a ring handle. This was not on the original floor plan. I pried it open. Underneath, a narrow shaft, like a dumbwaiter, leading straight down. Cold air rose from it, carrying a familiar scent: Moldavian blood, lavender. I dropped a flashlight down. It didn't hit the bottom. I dropped my phone. No sound. But something knocked back. Tap, tap, tap. That night I woke up not in my bed, but lying beside the open trapdoor, my hand dangling inside it, like I'd been about to climb down in my sleep. The whisper that night didn't come from inside the house. It came from inside me. We're almost done waiting. Part 9. The last night. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking up, standing in the hallway, staring into the mirror. Only, it wasn't me in the reflection. It looked like me. Same hair, same eyes. But she was smiling too wide, and behind her the walls were breathing. The wallpaper pulsed like lungs beneath skin. She leaned closer. Her lips didn't move, but I heard her loud and clear. "You let him in." I blinked. The hallway was normal again, but my body felt wrong, like something was off. That day I didn't eat. I didn't speak. By evening, the sky outside had gone a strange color, greenish gray, like a bruise. The power went out again. No more lights. Only the fire in the hearth, and then the house exhaled. I felt it. The walls shivered. The floor flexed beneath my feet. The windows fogged from inside. A voice rose, deeper than the whispers, not male, not female, not human. "Sleep, Rachel. Sleep so I can wear your skin." I ran upstairs. The mirror in the hallway shattered as I passed, not from impact. It just cracked, like it was tired of showing what I'd become. In the bedroom, the trapdoor was open again. But this time there were stairs, wooden ones, carved into the shaft, leading down. I don't know why I followed them. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I had no choice, but I descended, step by creaking step, into the core of the house. Part 10. The Whispering Room. The space below was impossible. It was bigger than the house itself, like a cavern carved into shadow. In the center, there was a bed, an exact replica of mine. Someone lay on it still, breathing shallow. I stepped closer. It was me, but asleep, peaceful, smiling. Then all around me, dozens of voices whispered in unison, "She's ready now." And that's when I understood. This place, the house, it was a machine, a trap, a net for souls too tired to fight. It didn't just whisper to you, it made you whisper back. Until you weren't sure who was speaking anymore. Until you were part of the house. Just another voice in the walls. Epilogue, 3:13 a.m. I woke up in the bed, but not in the underground room, in my room. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. Was it morning? Had I dreamed the whole thing? I got up slowly, my legs ached. In the mirror, I looked off. Slightly taller, eyes too wide, skin pale. And then I saw the note on the door. "Welcome to Ashgrove." That wasn't the name of my aunt's house. That was the name of a different place, the inn from another story. Another victim. I opened the door. The hallway was endless, no stairs, no exits, just door after door after door, each marked with a name. I passed one that read Margaret Wyatt, another, Eleanor Grayson. The next, Rachel Wyatt. And the last door, it had your name on it. Yes, you, the listener. And if you hear a whisper tonight at 3:13 a.m., are you awake? Don't answer, because the house already knows, and it's almost your turn.